My best friend of 17 years stopped answering my calls in March. I want to be precise about what that means, because there is a difference between the gradual drift that happens between friends over time, the calls that get less frequent, the visits that stop being planned, the particular fade of a relationship that has not been tended, and what happened with Beth. What happened with Beth was not a fade. It was a stop. One day she answered my calls, and the next day she did not. And the line between those 2 days was as clear as a wall. We had spoken on a Wednesday, an ordinary call, the kind we had been having for 17 years. She was in her kitchen making dinner, I was in my car in a parking garage. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing specific and everything important. Her daughter's school situation, a problem with a contractor I was having, her husband Dan's work trip, which she was ambivalent about, my sister's visit, which I was dreading. The specific texture of two lives running alongside each other and reported upon at regular intervals. I called her the following Sunday. She did not answer. I called on Tuesday. She did not answer. I texted. I got no response. Not even the typing bubble. The particular small cruelty of knowing someone has read your message and chosen not to even begin an answer. In 17 years, Beth had never not answered. Before I tell you the rest, subscribe, because every story on this channel is real, it is raw, and it will stay with you. And drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one. Now let me tell you what happened when I drove to her house in April. I want to tell you about Beth because she is not a peripheral figure in my life whose disappearance is puzzling but manageable. She is the person who knew me best. Not my husband. My husband knows me in the specific way of a person you live with, which is deep and real and different from being known. Beth knew me in the way of someone who was present for the construction of who I am, who saw me become the person I became, and who was there for the becoming. She knew things about my life that no one else knows. She knew who I was before I was sure. We met 17 years ago at a book club in Fremont. She had moved to Seattle from Portland with Dan, her husband of 3 years, and was doing the particular work of a person who has transplanted herself and is looking for roots in new ground. I was already rooted in Seattle, but in the specific loneliness of someone whose friends had recently scattered. 2 to the East Coast, 1 to Australia, the natural attrition of your 30s when people go where their lives take them and the people they leave behind have to rebuild. We were both, that night, a little hungry. We talked for 2 hours after everyone else had left, the host gently suggesting around midnight that she had work in the morning. We exchanged numbers. We had coffee that Saturday. We have been, since that coffee, the kind of friends that other people comment on. The kind where people ask, "How long have you known each other?" And when you say 17 years, they nod and say, "That makes sense," because the ease of it is visible. The specific comfort of 2 people who have been each other's constants long enough that they do not need to perform anymore, who can be quiet or loud or wrong or tired, and it does not cost anything. I want to tell you what I mean by that, the not costing, because I think it is specific and I think it matters to understanding what the silence has been. Beth and I had not had a significant conflict in 17 years. That sounds like a boast, and I do not mean it as one. I mean it as a description of a particular kind of friendship, the kind that does not generate friction because both people in it have learned each other's textures well enough to move around them. We disagreed about things. We irritated each other occasionally. She has a quality of certainty about certain topics that I find, at intervals, maddening, and I have a tendency to hedge and qualify that she finds similarly maddening. We said so. We laughed. We moved on. The moving on was always immediate and complete, which is the specific quality I am trying to describe. There was no residue. Things did not accumulate. 17 years of no residue. And then, in March, she stopped answering. I have spent 6 months trying to understand what would make 17 years of no residue produce a silence this complete. I have not arrived at an answer. That is the thing I have had to learn to hold. I drove to her house in April because I had spent 3 weeks doing what you do when someone you love goes silent, assuming there is a reason, assuming they will surface, assuming that the silence is about something happening in their life that will be explained when the crisis clears. And then I stopped assuming, and I drove to Ravenna, to the house where she and Dan had lived for 12 years, where I had been hundreds of times, where the key to the back door had been under the third flower pot from the left for as long as I could remember. I knocked on the front door. A man answered. He was about 40. I had never seen him before. I said, "I'm looking for Beth. I'm her friend, Carol." He said, "She asked me to tell you she's fine. She just can't talk to you anymore." I said, "What?" He said, "She said if you came to tell you she's fine, she said you'd come. She said to tell you she's sorry." I said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm her brother. I'm staying here for a bit." I said, "Her brother? Beth doesn't have a brother." He looked at me. He said, "She does." I know she didn't talk about me. There are reasons for that. But she asked me to be here in case you came, and you came, and I've told you what she asked me to tell you. I said, "Can I see her?" He said, "She asked me to say no." I said, "Is she safe? Is she in some kind of trouble? Is Dan—" He said, "She's safe. I can tell you that with certainty. She's safe and she's okay, and this is her decision, whatever it is, and she asked me to respect it, and I'm asking you to respect it too." I stood on the front step of my best friend's house, the house where I knew the key was under the third flower pot, and I looked at a man who was either her brother or not her brother, and I thought about 17 years. I said, "Please tell her. Please tell her that I love her and that I don't understand and that I'm here when she's ready." He said, "I'll tell her." I said, "Tell her specifically. Don't paraphrase. Tell her, Carol said she loves you and she's here." He said, "I will." I drove home. I sat in my car in my own driveway for a long time. My name is Carol. I am 49 years old. I am a graphic designer, which is relevant only in that it means my professional life is spent with questions of form and communication, how things look, and what they mean, and why a particular arrangement of elements produces a particular response. I have spent 6 months applying those habits to Beth's silence, and I have not arrived at an answer. But I have arrived at the shape of the question. My husband David said, the night I came home from Ravenna, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know. I don't have anything to do. She's made a choice." He said, "Do you have any idea why?" I said, "No, and yes. I have guesses." He said, "Tell me." I said, "Something happened. Between us, something happened that I don't know about, that I said or did or failed to say or do, that crossed a line I didn't know existed. Or something happened in her life, with Dan or with someone else or with something I have no knowledge of, that made her unable to be in contact with the people from the before." He said, "You've been friends for 17 years. I said, "I know." He said, "Is that enough context to understand this?" I said, "I thought so. I'm not sure anymore." I want to tell you what the 6 months since March have been like, because disappearance is not an event. It is a sustained condition, and the sustained condition requires its own kind of endurance. There are days when I am angry, not at Beth specifically, or not only at Beth specifically, but at the specific cruelty of silence as a communication method. We spend our whole lives learning to say hard things, learning to have difficult conversations, learning that the saying is better than the not saying. And then a person you love chooses not saying, and you have no recourse. You cannot have the conversation because you cannot find the person. You cannot ask why because there is no forum for asking. You are left with the question and no means of resolution. There are days when I am frightened for her, when I turn over the possibilities and land on ones I do not want to land on. When I think about the man at the door and try to parse what he said. She's safe, I can tell you that with certainty. And try to determine whether certainty was the word of someone who genuinely knew or the word of someone performing a knowledge they had been asked to perform. There are days when I miss her so specifically that I reach for my phone and start to dial before I remember. The reaching is automatic. 17 years of reaching has made it automatic. The stopping is always a small shock. I have started noticing when I do it, cataloging it, the way you catalog the symptoms of something you are trying to understand. Thursdays, most often. We always talked on Thursdays. Something about the particular quality of a Thursday, the week almost done, both of us tired and honest in the way that tired people become honest, made Thursdays our best calls. Thursdays are the hardest days now. There are also days when I am something closer to peace. Not resolved peace. I do not know if I will ever reach the resolved version. But a suspended peace. The kind that comes from having made a decision about what to do with something you cannot change. The decision I have made is this. I believe she is safe. I believe this was her choice, made deliberately, from a position of agency rather than desperation. And I have decided that I am going to hold her friendship as something real, even in the silence, because 17 years of real is not unmade by a March that went quiet. I drove back to Ravenna in June. No one answered the door. The third flower pot was gone. I have not gone back since. My therapist, doctor, Anne Choi, who works in Capitol Hill and who I began seeing in August when I understood that I needed a specific place to put the grief that had no other address, said to me in our third session, "What would it mean to let this be unresolved?" I said, "It would mean accepting that I might never know." She said, "And can you accept that?" I said, "I don't know yet." She said, "What would it take?" I said, "It would take believing that the not knowing is not the worst possible outcome, that some unknowns are livable." She said, "Is this one livable?" I sat with that for a long time. I said, "I think so. If I know she's safe, if I can hold the certainty of that one thing, I think the rest is livable." She said, "Then that's where you start." I have been starting there every morning. Some mornings it holds. Some mornings it doesn't, and I have to start again. My sister, the one whose visit I had been dreading when Beth and I spoke on that Wednesday, came in April, 2 weeks after I stood on the doorstep. She knew Beth slightly, had met her at family events, knew her in the way of a sister's close friend. When I told her what had happened, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Maybe it's not about you." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, Maybe something happened in her life that made it so she couldn't be in contact with anyone from a specific time or context. Maybe you're not the only person. Maybe you're not the cause. I had not thought of this. I had been thinking of it as something I had done, something I was responsible for. I had been conducting an internal audit of the past 6 months before March, looking for the thing I had said or failed to say, the moment where something had shifted. What if the shift was not about me at all? I called Dan's work number in July. Not his cell. I did not have his cell. I had always reached him through Beth. His work number at the architecture firm in Capitol Hill, where he has been a partner for 8 years. His assistant said he no longer worked there. I said, "When did he leave?" She said, "I'm not able to give out that information." I said, "Can you tell me if he's okay?" She said, "I really can't say anything." I thanked her and hung up. Dan was gone too. Both of them. Whatever had happened, it had happened to both of them, which meant it was something large enough to reorganize a life around, large enough to require both of them to go somewhere new and leave behind the architecture of the old. I do not know what that something is. I have tried to construct it from the available evidence, and I cannot. There are too many possibilities, and I do not have enough facts to eliminate them. What I have decided is that the specific nature of the something is not mine to know. She did not give it to me. She gave me, "She's fine." She gave me, "She's sorry." Whatever happened is hers, and she has chosen to carry it somewhere I cannot follow. I have to honor that. I do not want to honor it, but I have to. I spent a week sitting with the knowledge that whatever this was, it was not singular. It was not a choice made one evening. It was a life that had been dismantled and reconstructed somewhere else, with the people in it chosen or not chosen, and I had been not chosen. There is a specific quality to that, to being not chosen, to understanding that someone you love sat down and decided, carefully, that you could not come with them into whatever was next. I have tried to find a way to hold it that does not feel like rejection. I have not fully succeeded. I went to therapy in August. A therapist in Eastlake who works with grief, not bereavement in the technical sense, but grief in the broader sense, the grief of loss that is not death, which does not have the same cultural architecture of support and ritual and acknowledged mourning. She said, "What's the hardest part?" I said, "Not knowing." She said, "Not knowing what happened?" I said, "Not knowing if she's okay. Not knowing if she thinks about me. Not knowing if this is permanent or if there's a version of her future that eventually includes a phone call." She said, "Can you live with not knowing?" I said, "I'm going to have to." She said, "What would it take?" I said, "It would take believing that she's safe, that whatever this is, it's a choice she made from a position of safety, not desperation." She said, "Do you believe that?" I sat with it. I said, "I think I do." The man at the door said, "Certain." He said, "She's safe," and he said, "Certain." He wasn't performing ease. He was performing certainty. That's a specific thing to perform if you're not certain. She said, "What does certainty sound like to you?" I said, "It sounds like someone who knows, not someone who hopes." She said, "Then maybe that's what you hold." I hold it. I do not always hold it with ease. There are nights when I put it down and pick up something darker. But in the morning, I pick it back up. The certainty in the voice of a man I had never met who was standing at the door of my best friend's house. She's safe. I have written Beth a letter. I wrote it in September and I have not sent it. I am not certain I know where to send it. The house in Ravenna may or may not still be hers. But I wrote it because I needed to write it. Because 17 years of knowing someone leaves things that need to be said even when there is no address to say them to. I told her that I am not angry at her. That I was, for a while, and that I am working through it, but that anger is not the loudest thing. I told her that I trust the certainty in her brother's voice, or whoever he was, and that I have made peace with not understanding. I told her that 17 years is not canceled by silence, that the things she knew about me and I knew about her are still true, that the friendship is not unmade even if it is paused. I told her, if there is ever a version of your life that can include me in it, I'm here. The same number. I have had the same number for 12 years. I'm here. I sealed the letter. I put it in a drawer. Maybe someday I will know where to send it. There is a book club in Fremont that still meets. Not the same one. That one ended years ago, the way book clubs end, the natural lifespan. A different one, in the same neighborhood. I went in September for the first time because I needed to sit in a room with people and talk about something. I drove there in the dark, and I parked, and I sat in my car for a moment. I thought about a night 17 years ago when I talked to a woman I had just met for 2 hours in someone's living room, and the host gently suggested it was late, and we exchanged numbers in the doorway, and I drove home thinking, I think I just met someone important. I was right. I met someone important. Whatever she is doing now, wherever she is, she was important. She was one of the most important people in my life, and I am going to hold that without conditions, without requiring it to make sense, without demanding an explanation that may never come. She's safe. Someone who knew said so with certainty. I am going to keep believing that. That is the story I am keeping.